Good evening, everyone. David Salmon here from Adelaide. We're talking to you live, and I have with me John Hartley. And, good evening. How are you tonight, John?
I'm really well, David. Thank you. Kuku Yaral di Bama. Kuku Bunagaran ja. Kuku Bundan da ganan ba bubu. Yalla da jawun Kuku. Welcome to everybody. I just want to say thank you to all those people who have sent in emails and words of encouragement. I also want to say hello to our brothers, First Nation brothers and sisters over in across the sea.
I got some emails through the week, John, from Trish, who's in Canada at the moment, traveling over there.
Yeah.
And so it's been really good to, as we've started to pick up a little bit of steam here, to really start making some connections with people out there. So that's great, and I think we'll get underway pretty well straight away, John. And we've going to be talking tonight about your parents' story in particular. So we'll be coming closer to home, and so John, I think you're going to tell us about your mother first, lovely lady that she is, beautiful woman from far North Queensland, and so I'm just going to hand it to you, John, and I think you tell early days for her growing up, and so that our listeners can really get a sense of. So we're talking within memory now, how the conditions were for people, specifically growing up in North Queensland. So over to you.
Okay, thanks, David. Look, as a general statement, things weren't good for Bummer anywhere in far North Queensland, and particularly for women. Many women endured and suffered horrendous impacts and effects from the colonisation and disruption to family life. And so my mother's is just one of those many stories. And of course, the little story that I know can also be, is reflected right across this continent that First Nations people referred to as our homelands. My mother, as I think last week we ended up at Munjaldimbi, or deep into Mossman Gorge, and my mother remembers arriving there around 11, 12 years of age. She was attending a school in the town when they were living in the town. Endured quite very disturbing effects of racism and such whilst attending the school. But anyway, they moved down to Mossman, into the gorge, and my mother spent her days with her elder sisters, swimming in the gorge and collecting and eating bush foods, and going on quite extensive walks out to the sea areas around Guya Beach and things, looking for mussel and mud crab and pippies and so on. So as a young girl, they grew up, quite a good environment in swim. When I say that, in their country, swimming in the gorges and things like that, adventuring around and such. But they did grow up under their act. In fact, not only their mothers and fathers, but now the first generation of grandfather and grandmother's children were also growing up on the act. And not only that, the next generation coming from my mother and her elder siblings also grew up under the act. And as I said before, the act controlled where you could go and what you could do, who you could marry, and when you could walk on country and when you couldn't. So they were very harsh and strict control orders. It wasn't, I'm not going to get into details, but it was a very, very horrendous time during that period. At 13 years old, my mother went into domestic service up in the Daintree on a cattle farm, where her duties included washing, ironing, milking cows, breakfast, house cleaning, etc., etc., etc. And you have to remember, in those days, it was the old, you had to heat the iron on the old wood stove, and you had to, when you wash, you had to do it in a boiling copper and things like that. So it was very labor intensive and hard work, and you can imagine, as a young girl, the workload would be heavy. It was when the farmers got my mother to begin rising at 4 to go out and milk the cows, that my mother stood up and said no, and I'm not going to wear that, and because of the workload that she was under. And I asked my mother one time, I said, what turned you off? And she said, I had to iron their bed sheets. And I said, well, and what upset you about that? She said, well, who irons their bed sheets unless you've got a slave, Yeah. And it sort of made sense to me. But my mother left. My mother left there, and she returned back to Mossman, where she would go house to house doing domestic duties. Whereupon the people in the houses would offer a half a pack of tea or a bit of sugar for the work my mother done. My mother, even at a very young age, refused to take the rations and kept her hand out and demanding money, and stating that she would quite capable of purchasing her own goods.
Yes. There's a very strong pressure to sort of maintain people in that subservient position, isn't it? I mean, the mindset was one of looking down on people, and that was really evident by their actions. The charity, seeing people as charitable and unable, yet clearly people were very able to, live a good life if allowed to. It was.
And as I said before, I don't know that a great deal has changed really in the real sense of it, But my mother.
So John, if I can just interrupt there a sec, because some people will find that a challenging statement to say that a lot of things haven't changed, because in a lot of places the perception is that a lot of things have changed, and yet I know from being up there with you in your country that you're absolutely right. A lot of things haven't changed. But can you just talk to that a little bit?
Well, maybe if going back to the first series, and I spoke about the paper shuffling. If you look at the Northern Territory intervention, what they referred to as the intervention into First Nations communities. It was pretty much word for word the very same policies and acts that was going around in the 1800s. No real difference. Same outcomes. And people can say, well, you have education, you have all these kinds of things, and that's true. That's all there, but the fragmentation and annihilation of family lines and connections, and also relationships back into country, has left a very, very heavy toll, and not only in far North Queensland, but across, throughout our homelands over this continent.
Yeah.
But my mother came from a strong family, and particularly the women in my mother's family, very strong. Even the women today are all very, very, very strong women. So my mother worked, left school early, endured a lot of things there, and endured some other quite horrendous things whilst in Mossman, which caused her to, as she says, lose her smile. And I think about that, and those things, that what does that take for a child, essentially, to lose their smile.
Yes.
Yeah. But from Mossman, coming back to Mossman, doing the domestic service, her elder siblings had left home by then, and Mum was there taking care of my grandmother and grandfather, as well as the two brothers that were still at home then. So she was cooking and preparing meals and ensuring that the home life was going okay at that point. But there was a point where my mother left Mossman, and she headed to a place called Machan's Beach up near Cairns, or just across the way really from Holloways Beach. My mother ended up around there during the 50s, so during the 40s, and Mum remembers during the Depression years and things like that, Mum was doing domestic work, but also doing home work and home chores with the family, etc., etc. During the 50s, Mum ended up in Machan's Beach, around Machan's Beach, and where her elder sister Glady and her husband Paddy O'Shane were living at the time, and Mum would visit her sister and brother-in-law quite often. Mum was very attached to family. She loved all her family, and it was during the 1953 sugar strike in Bundaberg on the docks up in Queensland, where my father was sent up there to far North Queensland, and it was while there that Tiger, or Paddy O'Shane, looked after my father, ensured he had a place to stay and was looked after and things like that. And it was on a visit out to the O'Shane's house at Holloways Beach where my father met my mother, I think in 53, around 53, I think it was. And they got to talking, and one thing's led to another. My father had finished his work around the docks up in that area and returned back to Sydney. He sent a letter asking my mother to join him. My mother thought hard and long about that, not wanting to, leave her family and things like that, all those things that people consider.
Yeah, the gorge there. Yeah, that's a long way from Sydney to Mossman.
It is indeed. Yeah, yeah. But she did, she arrived in Sydney, and they went to stay at a friend of my father's house out at Carlton. And I was born in Cogra Hospital in 56. Now, my father's mother and father, his mother Uriel Callanan, and his father John Robert, came from Burke, and they ended up in Sydney during the Depression years, and they were both members of what they called to the IWW, which is the International Workers of the World, which is a big movement during, around 1910, 1912, 13, 14, and they played a big role in opposing the First World War, 1914, 1950 First World War. And when they were in Sydney. And things were a bit harder there. My father never liked school. So he began, as he said, to hump his bluey across Australia, and he jumped trains, and he walked out in the Gulf countries, and picked up his susso at various post offices throughout the country. And after a couple of years of doing that, I think he'd just turned 15 or near 15. He stowed away on a ship that was headed to, I think, Jamaica. And once he had hit Jamaica, of course, he was found out. The authorities found him, threw him in jail, and they asked him where he was from, and he said, "Oh, well, I'm from England." And so the next ship that came along heading back to England, they threw him on it.
Right.
So it was a little bit smart at a very young age, but he wasn't ready to return to Australia. But from that point on, he travelled the world around via the seas, and he was thrown in jail many, many times. In a lot of the docks they put in the black labour, the slave labour. He stood, in protest, and ended up being thrown in jail a number of times due to that activity. But
so that was happening at a very young age. He was.
Oh yeah, he's very active. I mean, he came from a very active, politically active family. His mother and father, both members of the IWW, both prominent in the anti-conscription, anti-war protests of 1914 and 15. My grandfather was actually known as the Broomstick Knight, and in those days the clotheslines used to have a wooden prop, and people would remember those.
Oh yes,
And during those times, a lot of the people that were being thrown out of their houses forcibly by police and the landlords. My grandfather had a knack of using that particular prop to be able to dismount the police officers from their horses.
Okay.
And so he earned the handle of the Broomstick Knight.
Right.
And so, Dad came from a very active family, so he wasn't shy on taking a step forward, or standing up, rather. And he ended up in the New York docks. He was shipping out of the New York docks. He worked on the Waterside Workers, walked on the wharves there for as a longshoreman, and was involved in a lot of early protests on the wharves in New York, and that's when the wharves and that were full of gangsters and Murder Incorporated, and he wore a big scar down his face as a result of one of those protests against those, thuggery and things
Right.
on the New York wharves. But what happened he began to ship out. He joined the Merchant Marines and was sailing out of New York. And as he said, the best thing he could contribute was to keep the supply lines open in Murmansk, Russia. And for those people that don't know, the Murmansk Run, as it was known across the Atlantic, was a very, very dangerous run for all those seamen and women that were on that run. But he's seen that keeping those supply lines open was vitally important strategically during that war. But like his fellow, shipmates, they were torpedoed a few times, but he kept returning back. They were in the drink, and the Atlantic, as you know, would be quite icy. But he fortunately, him and some others were picked up on a number of occasions. They were thrown in for a swim, as he said, and he was eventually awarded a presidential citation from Truman. And I think a few days later was then deported by the very same president as being politically undesirable. So go figure. And so he ended up back in Australia in about 1949. It would have been earlier, but they took him off the boat in Malaysia and threw him in jail there for about a year, just for good measure, where he began to organise those people in the jails. And so eventually the Australian consulate or officials secured his release and returned him back into Australia in 1949, whereupon he worked in the wharves. And then, he done the coastal runs on the sea, and then eventually he came into the wharves. And he became active within the Waterside Workers Federation during those years. And as was said, it was during those years in '53 where he was sent up to these ports in far North Queensland, and eventually was to meet my mother. So it was a very roundabout journey for both of them.
Certainly, a very, just by that description of travelling the world, from the age of 15, something like that, through to, working for the waterside unions, a very colourful character. Just as a matter of interest, I remember seeing there was a bit of newsreel footage that he was in, I think, from the ABC. Is that right? From the was it the 50s or?
Most probably from the ASIO.
ASIO, that's right. There's a whole story about that, isn't there?
Yeah. He never said he was a communist. They said that he proclaimed it. He was a very proud communist. He believed, that everyone should have a fair go, and he battled. And in fact, he done a lot of work raising the Aboriginal struggle and issues within the trade unions during the '50s, and that, wasn't an overly easy feat, And he was travelling around to Aboriginal communities back then.
The connection between the waterside workers and it was the same here in Adelaide at Port Adelaide, wasn't it? I mean, the number of people I've spoken to, in Adelaide, it was a lot of Aboriginal men worked on the not barges, but the small ships that traded up and down the coast, picking up wheat or delivering things. Backbreaking work, as a lot of work was in those days.
Yeah.
But there seemed to be a particular affinity between working men and women on the wharves and Aboriginal people. There seems to be a natural connection there.
Oh yeah, I think you had. Well, a lot of the seamen had travelled the world, and they've seen these very same conditions, very same oppression, and being dealt to people, across the globe. And then and they stood up then, and it was only a natural progression or a consequence that when they see it in their own country, in their own backyard, that they stand up and also say something and contribute to the betterment, or trying to make things a little better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then, so your mother and father were then living in Sydney, and your father working on the docks in Sydney. Just tell us how that worked. Just flesh that story out for us. Where was your folks living, and was your dad working?
Well, they at the time they were living at Carlton. My father's working on the docks as he was at that time the secretary of what they call the Job Delegates Association, and that was an organisation that was formed to unify and the rank and file of the Waterside Workers Federation, and it was later to spread to all ports of the Waterside Workers Federations throughout Australia. But he was still, he was still on the tools, that is, on the job. He was still lumping the coal, the wheat, whatever it was. But he was also very actively involved as a rank and filer, but also as a secretary of the Job Delegates Association.
So he continued to travel, see a bit of the country while working in that secretary role, and as an organizer, and as bringing people together, and basically active for workers' conditions and rights and wages and so on.
Oh yeah, and well, for human rights, and he was also, a very noted peace activist as well, as many returned, soldiers and veterans and naval and merchant marine people were. They were very anti-war, and they were very active in peace movements and things like that. So yeah, he very active in all that, and yeah, meetings and going to different ports in Melbourne or Adelaide here, and others, organising and strengthening their organisation. Yeah, to try and not only better the conditions industrially on the job, but better the conditions of people generally in society.
Yes. So in those days, as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, there was really no security for any of those jobs, particularly on the wharves. You would get a day's work at a time. I understand it, unless you were actually on a ship. But if you were part of the pool of workers that there was no such thing as permanent work. Even if you did a run up and down the coast, there was no guarantees for you. So it's different to today in terms of the need for that sort of work.
Oh, that's right. I mean, they never had washrooms, proper toilets. They never had gloves, protective gear. They never had any sense of permanency or on their jobs. I mean, all those kinds of things were fought for through struggle of all those men and women during the time, advocating and pushing for change and to better the lot of people on the wharves. And it was only through their struggles that those conditions were gained. They certainly weren't given to them by political parties or by the major shipping empires, and that's what they were in those days. They were, shipping monopolies. They would prefer to keep those conditions going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so one of the effects of that that I also hear, people reminisce about was the effect of that particularly on the women and the people who were living in those waterside areas, the communities and the strength and the absolute dependence and support that people would give each other, I guess, as a result of those tough times.
Absolutely. I mean, my mother was also active during the women's, Waterside Workers Women's Committee. They, if there were strikes or things, they would gather together. They would get the food. They'd be making lunches. They'd be making food parcels. Doing the hard yards, and that's what it took. It wasn't weighted. And it was the same with the Aboriginal struggle. People didn't wait to be given a grant or money to do things. They came together in a community, as a community, collectively. They worked together and they got the job done. Very, very different from today. It was very. It was about the collective coming together.
Yeah. So, John, we've been talking nearly half hour here. What's coming up in the story? I guess we're getting closer to present day and closer to your particular story. Is that right? What can we look forward to?
Well, I guess next week it would be. I was born out of country. When we say that, I was born away from my mother's country. I was born in the Gadigal country, Eora country, and some 3,000 miles away. So I guess my father passed away on the job. He went to work one morning and had a massive heart attack and passed away on the job. He was 45.
Oh, really? I didn't realise he was so young.
Oh, yeah, he was only a young man. Yeah. But you can imagine that he had pretty much of an action-packed life within those.
Well, that's
years.
right. Yeah, yes, it's you certainly couldn't count or measure his life in the years.
Yeah. And so I guess maybe next week I'd like to perhaps flesh out my first connection, first contact with my grandparents, first time walking in my mother's country, meeting my relations, and what that means, I guess, what our relationship to our country means, and also our relationship, and to be around family, to be with family, because my mother, my father's mother and father had also just passed away before my father, so my mother was here, my mother was down here. There was another auntie here for a little while in Sydney, but she was essentially here by herself with a family of 6. So it was a big slog again for my mother, and a huge loss for my mother, as indeed it was for all the family.
Yeah.
But I guess I'd like to look at walking into country, meeting the grandparents and relations, and reconnecting back to country, and to family, because the fragmentation and the effect of colonisation and these policies that have on people remain intergenerational,
Yes.
and they happen in very not often, and they're not always in overt ways, or obvious ways. They creep into our DNA, if you like,
Yes.
Very, our genetic makeup's very subtle, but very can be very destructive ways too.
Yes. Yes.
Mm. So I guess
I just see that Mona's leaving us here, and she's saying thanks, John, David. Thank you, Mona. Look forward to seeing you next week. John, just before we close out for tonight, there's a comment from Max here. Wow, what an amazing family stories of strong activism, resistance, and fighting for justice. So much to be proud of. I imagine. I find the IWW Wobblies incredible for their militant opposition to imperialism and conscription way back then. How do you see all this now, John?
Well,
Max asks.
Well, I think, Max, I think we spoke, the Wobblies, as you rightly said, they were people with conviction, but who also believed in the collective strength of people. They weren't individualism, Unfortunately, a lot of the organisations around today are simply government institutions. They really, I think we all endure a great loss from the wobbly stance, and also all those militant actions that have come afterwards. I think from the 50s, and you have to go back, when you look at the IWW, the Communist Party, and all those things, Menzies had always tried to destroy it, and that hasn't stopped. Menzies tried it, John Howard tries it, Tony Abbott tries it, Mal Brough tries it with his current rash of industrial laws, and it's about keeping workers and opposition down in the interest of big business, and the same, with the across the Aboriginal country, it's the hardest thing we have to get is simply for people to tell the truth. Aside from our just demands, just to simply tell the truth, and let's go from there. And I received a thank you, Max, for your interest, and thank you for your emails. And perhaps we can answer some of that later, about the truth commissions and things like that, But I think the hardest thing today is for those people in power to tell the truth. And we've all become so caught up and changed to our mortgages, and we're so financially and materially bound, a lot of us, and I'm not saying that that's necessarily a bad thing, but it certainly restricts, when you have to weigh up your protest against, well, I'm going to lose a house if I do this, I'm going to lose this, it sort of quietens the struggle a little bit, unfortunately,
Sure. And I think there's so much more now that actually the distractions from that as well, times have certainly changed, community has changed. Mona makes sorry, Mona, you weren't leaving at all. Make the comment here. Wanted to get a thank you in. You're welcome. Mona, who I met at the Cafe Yampur, where we showed Two Brothers Walking a couple of weeks ago. She says, child of French anti-Arab colonialism. So it's a story that has many variations. Always the same theme, where there's the sort of the major monopolies in particular that are really the vehicle of colonialism, that just rides roughshod over people, and yet they rely on keeping a certain amount of people in servitude to really run the colonial machine at the same time. It's about as unjust as anything can be.
It's a beast that keeps morphing and into different names and different countries, different areas, but it's the same beast when you start to peel back the paperwork.
That's right. That's right.
And it's the very same acts that continue today. It's the very same act that continues to deny First Nations sovereignty in this country. Continues, with flippant things, like constitutional recognition and things like that. I mean, it just doesn't come near, and that's why we say, simply tell the truth, and let's see what happens when we tell the truth.
Yes.
And put it out into the light of day.
That's right.
But vested interests have vested interests, and they will protect that. And we know the lengths that they will go to protect that.
That's one of the things that I get. One of the things I'm get very excited about, John, is the opportunities we have now, just in doing what we're doing, to put out a different story. And this is happening all over, and there's no doubt that we're seeing those big old vested interests that belong to last century or the century before, not doing so well. Still a long way to go. They're certainly not near the end yet, and some of those, some of the big, corporations will continue. There's no doubt about that. But sure. It's the struggle is changing its character, I think, now that we have new tools available to us. Well,
the only thing that is certain, they say, is that struggle is absolute, and that's true. We have to become comfortable with that. And I think next week we'll perhaps talk a little bit about myself and connection and what is our relationship to country, and perhaps there may be something after that where we begin to talk about colonisation and the act of decolonising.
Yeah,
and that may be of interest.
Going to, of course. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yeah.
And I'd remind people we've actually had a little bit of activity on our documentary Two Brothers Walking this week, and I don't know if it's related to what's happening here, but very pleased that people are accessing that story where John you talk about this some more, and we get to see some of your country, that beautiful gorge up at Mossman as well. So I just want to remind our listeners that on Vimeo.com you can Google for Two Brothers Walking, and that documentary is available there. So, John, I think we're coming to the end of today's episode. Thanks so much again for sharing this sort of very, very personal and yet very public story. I think it's one of the strongest things to do is, as you say, to tell the truth, and not only to tell the truth, but listen to the truth. And that is it's not always easy to hear what really happened, and I won't get into a big rant about that now, but I just know from my own situation how old I was before I actually started to hear proper stories about this.
Exactly, and
I've been
much harder. Yeah, sorry, David. Yeah.
No, I just say I've been privileged to hear those stories. So I know that most people have yet to actually make contact with the original people of this country.
Yes, yeah. And in seeing what's happened, hopefully we can make the connection between what is happening, and make make change for the betterment, of all human beings,
Thanks once again, John, and thank you to all our listeners this week. It's great to have you here. There's perhaps a moment for any last questions that you might have. Max, thanks for your comments today. Totally agree, with the importance of these stories, getting them out there, and it is a great joy and a privilege for us to be doing that. And someone, I'm not sure who it is, the name isn't there, but yes, twobrotherswalking.com is a website where you can connect with the documentary. And Deanna is here, John, asking you too. Can you see it?
Shout out to Uncle John from the Cairns tribe.
Yeah.
Is that? Hey, Deanna. Love to all the family.
I wonder if people would mind. I was going to do this earlier. Oh, it's Carol there who's doesn't have her tag. I know now. That's my wife Carol Omer. Thank you. Just would you mind, listeners, just before we close, just popping into the chat box there. Let us know where you're from, so we know that Deanna is from Cairns, or where you're listening from at the moment. Would just be very, very interested to hear where you're from, and I hope that the audio improved as we went. I did try a different microphone, so I really appreciate your feedback on just how you're experiencing the episodes, because we're on a learning curve here, and want to bring you the best the best that we can. So we've got Adelaide people here. Adelaide, it's great. And some other notifications on Facebook. So I can't see those at the moment. I've just got a message up saying that there's some there. So thanks once again, everyone.
Jiggy near Lismore, Bunjalung. Oh, Jiggy near Lismore, Bunjalung country.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, Lismore. Okay.
Bunjalung, Bunjalung country, Ghana country. Yeah.
Terrific. Feedback. You're doing well, David. Keep going. Thanks, Mona. There was a comment earlier on that the audio was coming through a bit chipmunky. Maybe someone would just drop a comment in the chat box there. Did that improve? I did try a different microphone as we come in, and I would like to know if that made any difference. So I'll just wait on. We have got a bit of a lag here of about 20 seconds or so before it gets to you on YouTube. Steve and Felicity in Sydney. Great to hear from you there. Okay, still some chipmunky things going on. Not sure what that is. I'll see if I can find what's responsible for that.
David was chipmunky, not John. Slight improvement.
Right. Okay. So it's not the mic. That's one thing we can rule out.
After 50 years, a slight improvement's good.
That's right. Okay. Thanks, everyone. We'll finish there for tonight, and look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you, family, and all those listening. Thank you very much.